everyone, and welcome to the LECA Queen podcast. It is good to see you all. Today, I have Fidel, the Pon Don. Say hi, Fidel.
Hello, everyone.
It's so good to have you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to do this.
Oh, I'm excited. I'm very excited. And I know a lot of you are excited as well because you have a lot of questions about Pon. And I'm so happy that you put all your questions down. I put out a poll and you put all your questions down, and we've got all those questions, and we will try to get through them. And I'm just going to let the Pondon introduce himself and sort of lay down your credentials, Pondon. Why should we listen to what you have to say?
Yes, I've done a lot of speaking conventions. I really enjoy sharing knowledge, and my long term goal is to really study passive hydro and long term growing. I've been going at it for about 4 years now, and it's been really successful for me. And I just want to continue to study the longevity of it, and seeing how far we can grow, like outside temperatures. It's done amazing for me inside. And so I've done a couple of plant shows, plant expos, sharing my knowledge and just sharing what I've learned along the way and encouraging people to try passive hydro because soil was not the best option for me for my growing environment. And if it wasn't for passive hydro, I wouldn't be growing as many plants as I'm growing now. And I like to give people that extra little like confidence of being like you can grow plants too. Maybe it wasn't meant to be in soil. Maybe it can be in passive
Yeah.
hydro. Maybe it can be in leca or in
Mhm.
pon, and see if it works better for you. And I just want to be encouraging to anybody that you can grow plants. And even if you fell in soil, you can definitely grow plants in whatever medium will work best for you for your environment. So
Well, today we are talking about Pon, and we'll get started. So, first question is, what is Pon exactly? Can you buy it or do you need to make it yourself?
pon is basically a mineral mix of pumice, lava rock, and zeolite.
Mhm.
You can make it yourself. I've seen a lot of people do it recently, but I also want to include that you basically can use pumice by itself and it'll work the same way, essentially.
Mhm.
You can also buy lava rock by itself and it'll do the same thing. There is four components in lechuza, which a lot of people recognize as pon. The only difference
Mhm.
between that and if you make it yourself is just that it wouldn't have a fertilizer. But a lot of people
Mhm. Mhm.
like that as well because you can control the nutrients that you're giving your plants.
Sure,
Um,
sure. I think
but
let's
it's
choose upon now to have one that doesn't have fertilizer in it, don't they?
I think they do. I think they call it basic pon now. Yeah,
Mm.
which is
Mm.
great. And a lot of people. I just like to remind people that a lot of things can work the same way as pon, and there's different ways that you can go about using it. So it doesn't technically have to be pon, but you can definitely make it yourself, or you can buy it
Mhm.
already made. And there's a
Yep.
bunch of different mediums that work the same way as well.
Okay, so going into question number two, which is, can we make our own pawn? And this person says, I've read that 4 parts pumice, 2 parts lava rock, and 1 part zeolite is a good version. Is that accurate? Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I definitely have not made my own mixture, and I definitely have experimented with mixing a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that. I know a lot of people say that they like to make it stretch because it is so hard to find here in the States.
Hmm.
But what I see a lot of people doing is one part of each rock.
Hmm.
So I'm sure the 4 parts pumice and the 2 parts lava rock and the one zeolite is really good. Zeolite acts almost like a buffer when you over
Hmm.
fertilize. But I have seen a lot of people do one and one and one and one. That's what I've
Yeah,
seen.
yeah. Okay.
And
It's
you
very
know,
interesting that you say that. So many people have there are lots of different recipes that I've seen on the internet myself. And I
yes.
think a lot of it goes to what you said, stretching, what's the more expensive product, what
Hmm.
people can easily get and so on. So I don't know. I've never made DIY porn myself.
Yeah, I'm really big on sticking to a consistent medium. So I would rather just use one solid, either if it's lava rock or if it's pumice. I would actually stick to one medium because then you kind of know what you're working with. And if you're
Mm.
mixing too much of this or too much of that, then you can kind of like, when it's time to identify a problem, if you do have any problems, then it's kind of like, okay, well, what's wrong? Like, you mixed in too many
Mm.
things, you know. So
Where
I'm
do you
more of like
start?
a straight
That's
medium. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. But for those who do want to make their own pon, which is fine, I've got a recipe that my good friend Alison, the long-winded leca lady, recommends. That's what she uses, and she uses 4 parts pumice, 3 parts lava rock, 1 part zeolite, and 1 to 2 parts of leca. So again, this is nothing that I have experience in because I don't make my own pon. And I
Hmm.
think one of the things I've heard people talk about as well with making your own pon is how it actually does tend to be rather expensive as you're buying the different components, the pumice, the zeolite, and so on. And then it's also a little bit difficult to find the specific components, where to get the pumice or where to get this. And this as well, there's so many different types of pumice, so many different sizes of lava rock, and
Sizes.
people
Hmm.
get all sort of confused with all that. And I'm just like, too hard, too hard. Just get my pond that's made up or a mineral base that someone else has mixed up. They've gone
Hmm.
through the trouble. I'll just buy it. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, of course, I agree with that 100%.
Any tips for beginners who've never used pond before?
In all of my presentations that I've done, I always ask people, why are you thinking about switching to passive hydro? You know, some people say, oh, I overwater my plants, or I'm not home enough, or my schedule's too busy for it. I always ask people, ask yourself why you want to switch, and then always start with one plant. Me,
Mm,
I have a regular 9 to 5, I have school. So for me, it's really difficult on my schedule to have a collection that I have and then to keep up with the watering. So for me, it was a no brainer when I found out that I only had to water all of my plants like once every week and a half. I was like, okay, I can keep up with that. And then there's
hmm
technically no overwatering in passive hydro, if that makes sense. You can,
mm,
but I always tell people, like, start with one plant and ask yourself, why are you really switching to it? Like, what is making you want to switch to it? For
hmm
me, it's just been a breeze. It's worked with my schedule. It's worked with how often I like to water. And it's
hmm
worked because I definitely was over loving my plants when I first started.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, definitely start with one.
correct. Start with one
Start with
plant,
one, learn the ropes,
learn the ropes.
and then
See,
go.
yeah, yeah, and see if you like it, see if it works for you. I noticed a big
Hmm
change in my plants when I switched over to passive hydro, simply for the fact that like my plants were doing okay in soil. They were great, but I felt like they
hmm
weren't as, what's the word that I'm looking for? They weren't as, they didn't look as happy as I felt like they could be, if that
Sure.
makes sense.
They weren't
Now
living
all
their
of,
best lives.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And now I feel like all of my, like, when you touch a plant, I feel like it should bounce back at you. And now like
Yeah,
all of my plants do that in passive hydro. And
right.
I love,
Okay.
and and I think they look just a little bit more alive. So
Now, I will bring you back a bit because we've talked about pon, and then you've introduced this term passive hydro or semi hydro. How does what is that pon semi hydro? Is that the same thing? How do they relate? Just to clarify for people who might not know exactly what you're talking about.
yeah, of course. A lot of people use the word semi-hydro, which technically, if you really get down to the nitty-gritty, I mean, all plants are in technically in a hydro, right? Because we water them. A lot of people
Mm-hmm.
use semi-hydro because it's in sitting water, but I like to be a little bit more technical and I call it passive hydro because regular hydroponics, a you have a system
A
that
pump.
flushes water, a
Mm,
pump that flushes system like the flushes the nutrients through the roots, and it's a constant moving water. I call it passive hydro because it's you have a sitting solution of water in your reservoir.
mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
it's, I like to call it passive hydro, but either term for me is semi hydro, passive hydro. It, to me it works more as a passive hydro, if that makes sense.
That is
But
a
I
very
think,
controversial discussion, actually.
yeah.
There's a lot of purists and things who don't even subscribe to the term semi-hydro or passive hydro. There's just a lot of aggression around that
Yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah,
But I'm exactly like you. It's describing exactly what it is, and a lot of people understand it in that way. So as long as you've communicated what you're trying to describe, it's fine.
yeah. Because I always say like it's not full hydroponics because you don't have a system with flowing water. And technically, hydroponic people would be like, that's not passive. They kind of like bark at you. But and I agree, it's not fully hydroponics because you have a medium that you're using.
Well,
If that makes sense.
nobody said it was. Nobody said it was. So
Exactly.
absolutely fine. So next question is, should I rinse the pond off before using it for the first time? It looks pretty dusty and I'm worried about rinsing off the added fertilizer.
I would say that the answer to that question is yes, just to be sure. Because
Mm-hmm,
anytime that I pot a plant in pond, I always rinse it thoroughly with water and then
mm-hmm,
I add my solution to it. So I would
mm-hmm,
say that yes, it doesn't hurt to rinse your pond. Some companies
mm-hmm.
have them pre-rinsed. Lechuza says that you don't have to rinse them out, but I have experience in some bags where it can get dusty, and at the end of the day, it's all mineral rocks. So it's kind of silly to think that that's not going to create any dust inside of a bag. I mean, that they can break down and they're
They're
rubbing
rubbing
against each
against each
other.
other. They're throwing them in the
Yeah,
in the back of the van.
yeah, yeah. And so for good measure, I always tell people like, yes, whether I'm not saying take a whole bag and like try to rinse it out, but if you're putting it in your pot and you have the ability to let water run through it the
Mm-hmm.
first time for just to rinse it thoroughly, then yes, of course,
Yes.
rinse your pond.
Yep.
It does not hurt to take that extra step.
Is that going to get rid of the added fertilizer though?
No, not in Lechuza because Lechuza has a slow release fertilizer. And that's why I
And it's
always tell
those with
people
Lechuza ones. It's those little green beads, isn't it? It's the little
the
green beads that
small
are the
little
fertilizer.
beads.
Yep.
And they say
And
it's
then they're
good
not
for up
that
to
small. They're quite visible. They're quite big. You can see them.
and they say that it's good for up to 6 months. So I don't think a rinse would harm that at all. So
So your fertilizer will stay put and definitely give your pond a little bit of a rinse. Depending on where you are and what it is, you might want to think about whether you want to rinse that in your sink or not. That's another controversial subject
yes,
about
yeah,
clogging pipes and so on. But yeah, yeah.
I,
What do you
I
do?
have
I know
been
you live in an apartment. What do you do?
yeah I have been here for a while and knock on wood, I have not clogged any pipes or anything. And
Yeah, yeah,
a lot of the times now, I really just rinse it in the shower if I'm doing it. But
sure.
I've been reusing my pond now for about 4 years, so it's
So
very
it's
rare that
well
I use
rinsed.
anything.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. All right then. We'll leave that with you guys. Risk stuff at your own risk.
Rinse responsibly.
Yes. Next question. Do you use the same nutrients with Pon as you do with Leca?
I do fertilize lightly with every watering. They say
Mm-hmm.
that,
Mm-hmm.
Lechuza has built-in fertilizer that's good for up to 6 months, but I still do maybe a quarter of the dosage of the fertilizer that's recommended.
Yeah.
And I do fertilize with every watering, but I do try to make sure to stay on top of rinsing out my pond because you can get fertilizer buildup. And if you don't rinse out,
Mm.
your reservoir pot, then it can lead to nutrient blockage. So I definitely do
Can I
fertilize.
just ask you a question on there? Sorry to cut you off. So when you say that you're using Pon and you fertilize a quarter, so what happens after 6 months? So I mean, there are two scenarios here, right? You've just
Hmm.
got your
Hmm.
new plant that you're using a new pond. This is pond straight out of the bag, which has got fertilizer that should last 6 months. And
Hmm.
then that's pond A. And then you've got Pon B, which you've used for beyond 6 months. We're just now assuming that that fertilizer's gone.
Yes.
So do you treat those the same?
I do treat those the same because I fertilize so lightly, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously it's from trial and error because I was like, I'll just use the full dosage because
Yeah,
it's kind of hard to keep up with like newer pawn and older pawn. But
yeah.
ultimately, I got it down to just using like maybe a fourth of what the recommended dosage is, and it
Hmm.
I say it just gives it the added nutrients that it's probably not getting from the built-in fertilizer. You know,
That's interesting.
um,
So what fertilizer are you using, if you don't mind me asking?
of course, no. I am really. I've been using foliage focus for a while now,
Hmm.
probably for 2 or 3 years. I'm going to try this other one called C-Max, but I have not tried it yet because I usually try to take 2 or 3 plants that's different from my collection and specifically for those, see if there's any changes, two similar plants and
Sure.
see if whichever one likes it better. But yeah, foliage focus has
Mm.
been great for me.
Okay. Do you add anything else to your nutrients apart from foliage focus? That's just adding to the nutrients.
I do add silica
Okay.
for my plants.
Okay. Sure.
And I have been experimenting with adding CalMag. A lot of people swear by that
Yeah.
also, but I'm just slowly getting into that because
Okay.
what I've been doing hasn't really steered me wrong or anything. So it's been.
Well, yeah, I'm a big believer in starting with the basics. And
Hmm.
when I started, I was purely just using foliage focus only, nothing else.
Hmm.
Absolutely nothing else. And that worked fine for my plants. So like like if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Don't fix it.
But
Hmm.
then also, I think as one goes on with anything, with any hobby, you evolve, right? And you think,
Of
well, what
course.
will happen if I throw in some silica? What happens if I throw in this? Are things going to get
Hmm.
any different? So, yeah. The other question, though, so this particular question was, do you use the same ones with Pon as you do leca? Do you grow any of your plants in leca, purely leca as a substrate?
I do not.
Okay.
I will say that you have inspired me to try one, and I think I'm going to give one of my anthurium seedlings a shot and see just the difference in care, and see
Mm-hmm.
if the watering schedule works for me. I know you
Yeah.
showed me one of your other plants the other day, and I was just like, okay, because that was one of my worries was the weight, and then when you showed it to me, I
Yeah.
was like, oh wow, I'm like, okay, so that took
Yeah.
everything out of it. So yeah, I'm
Oh,
definitely gonna have
good.
to try one. But
I'm
currently,
so
right
glad to
now, I
hear
do
that.
not. Yeah, but
I'm
currently,
so
right
glad to
now,
hear that.
I do not.
And that is okay. But so going back to this original question that was asked, same nutrients for Pon and Leca, I think it's yes, because you use foliage focus, I use foliage focus. So basically, you can use any nutrient that's manufactured for a hydroponic setup. You can use anything.
Of
Doesn't really
course,
matter what it is.
if you're growing in passive hydro, a lot of people will do pH tests for their water because
Mm-hmm.
water is
Mm-hmm.
different everywhere.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
what might work for me in my area might not work for somebody else. I've
That's right.
tested my water maybe 3 good times, and every single
Mm-hmm.
time that I've tested it has been consistent. I also do water with distilled water, so it's gallon
Mm-hmm.
water. And ever since then, it's been consistently the same pH, and I've stuck with that. But passive hydro growers would know you'll know something is off with your pH balance because your plants will tell you. But that's
Yeah.
deeper
Yeah.
into
That's
growing.
right. So, how do you properly water plants in pond? Is there such a thing as how to properly water? Am I just, going and where am I, what levels am I putting the water at? All the good stuff.
So I'm a fan of top watering. I swear by self-watering pots, and I don't
Hmm.
know, it might not be. I'm not going to say lazy. I'm going to say efficient. I have these pots that have this clear window in here, and so
Hmm.
I can see where my water level is at. And I will
Yeah.
always tell people it's okay to top water because I like to hydrate my medium all the way through.
Hmm.
And I will say that you want to leave space from here to the water level.
Hmm.
And that's just what I always tell people because a lot of people are like, oh, well, I can't drown my plant. It's in semi hydro. Like, it's going to be fine. It's already in sitting water.
Yeah.
But if you fill up your water reservoir all the way up to here, you're going to run into problems because I did it myself. And I feel like
Mm.
there's definitely, some oxygen, some airflow that needs to happen between the bottom of your reservoir and to where your medium is sitting. Because there's a
So
width for
how
a reason.
does that translate into that little pee hole? Because it's all very well and good for you to say leave a space between the bottom of the pot and the top of the reservoir. But how do I know that I've actually left the space when I'm looking at that little hole? Can you
I
see
think
it?
it's I think you can see through it, and there's
Okay.
just a very small space to it. And again, I
Okay.
like to just make sure that there's water filled at least halfway and the wick is touching the water. I
Okay. All right. So
I'm
you're
you
not
know
filling it all the way up to the top so that you can't really see where the level of the water is from the little window. You can see a level from the little window.
Mhm. Yeah, and then
Okay.
if if you pick up your cachet pot and you're getting run dripping water from here from the base,
Hmm.
then you've probably filled up your pot with too much
Too
water. You should
high.
be having a yeah, you should be having a good drip from your wick, not
Okay.
the bottom of the pot.
Okay. Okay. Now I know, having spoken to you earlier, that you use the wick method. Those are your favorite pots. Those are the pots you use for all your plants.
Yes.
I'm thinking a lazy me, or unfortunate me who can't get those pots with the wick set up. I'm just going to put my pond my plant in a standard submerged setup. So it's going to be sitting in the reservoir. Would I be doing anything different? So obviously I don't have that little space and all that loveliness that you've just described.
Hmm.
So can people, I guess, so the question is, can people grow pond plants in pond in a submerged setup?
I have seen people do a submerged setup, so I'm not going to
Hmm.
say that no, you can't, because yes, you can. I will say
Yeah.
that if you are growing in a submerged setup, I've seen people have setups where they have 6 or 8 pots in a container of sitting water, and
Yeah.
I will say that airflow is probably really important in situations like that, because
Hmm.
if you have your medium consistently drenched, and I'm not going to say wet, I'm going to say like it's drenched, it's in sitting
Yeah.
water. I would say that your airflow probably has to be really good, but I have seen people grow that way. So I'm not going to say
Hmm.
no, you can't.
That's a good point. I agree 100%. What type of vessels or pots are best for beginners using pond? Beginners.
I would definitely say use a wicking pot or use a
Hmm.
pot with a cachet. Anything that has a smaller vessel that is going to hydrate your medium from the bottom up, whether it's the small point in the cachet pot or whether it's a wicking system, those have been fail proof to me. And that's
Yeah.
what's worked for me.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
have tried closed vessels with like
Hmm.
glass containers, and I've
Oh,
ran into a lot of problems with that. Personally, I ran into a lot of
you're
problems with that.
definitely looking at my sheet, because that was the next question. It
Was
was,
it?
yes, it was. It was. So, are you using the semi-hydro pots, which I guess are the self-watering pots,
Mhm.
or are glass jars better? Glass jars. Let's talk about glass jars. I love
Let's
glass jars discussions.
Okay, I love the look. I love the aesthetic. I I really want to get into people's minds that your environment really dictates what your growing conditions are going to be. In my home, I don't get natural sunlight. I
Hmm.
don't get a lot of airflow. I don't have additional fans for my plants. I tried the closed container method in glass containers. I tried it in different vessels. It just did not work for me. It worked
Hmm.
up to a point, and if people are growing in glass containers, especially with pond, I will say, just have enough space from your pond to your roots where the water level is not completely touching the roots, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
so it'll be your water level, then your medium, and then your roots should be sitting right above there.
But that
That's
all sounds very academic to me, because that's easy enough to do when you've just put the plant in there. But of course, the
hmm
plant grows, the roots grow, and they're growing down. So,
hmm
what do you do then?
And this is probably why I haven't had success with it, because I've noticed that the deeper and deeper my roots dug into that water reservoir, eventually
Yeah.
they just did not do well. You know, they were rotting.
So, what
Uh,
happened?
I had to change my method, and I had to
Yeah,
figure
no,
something
no,
else
no. What
out.
happened to the roots? What did you see as being the problem with growing in glass jars?
Oh, for me, they were definitely rotting.
Yep.
I definitely was getting root rot.
Mm.
Um,
Okay. All right.
and and then I had to constantly dig up the roots and put them above, like, in that
But
manner to where there
how
was
could you
level soil.
tell that your plant was getting root rot in the glass jar?
My plant was, it looks sad, if that makes sense. You can start getting,
Yeah,
your leaves start looking a little like folded in. It starts yellowing sometimes, and you can definitely tell that there's something wrong with it.
there's something going on. Yeah. So next, is pon treated like leca or more like soil? What's your take on that?
I would definitely say that LECA and Pon are treated the same.
Or
I've
should be treated similar. I think a lot of people think that leca, not leca, pon is almost like a substitute for soil. I think a lot of people who
hmm,
grow their plants in soil come to pon as, oh, I'll just use this and I won't get fungus gnats, and then treat it as soil and then run
hmm.
into the problems that they run into because they're treating it like soil and not like leca.
That's it. That's an interesting take. I've never really heard of that. I mean, I'm sure it's possible, but I definitely would say that LECA and Pon are essentially the same thing, just a different medium. You know, and
They
and
should be treated in the same way.
I agree. Yeah, 100%.
So what you're not doing is coming and watering your plant every day or every 2 days like you would if you're growing your plant in soil, which is then what people are doing
Yes.
if they move over to pon and then their plant gets root rot and they're like, well, this pon stuff doesn't work because they're treating it like soil or potting
Yes.
mix.
Yes. I think so. I think that could be a good I think that's a really good comparison because yes, I think people can do that easily with Pon.
But understanding that the difference between soil and pon, I think, is the secret to success. And whether you want to start throwing leca into it, it's completely irrelevant. It's just understand what makes the two different, soil and pon.
It is completely different. Yes, I agree. And I definitely will say that, soil you're dealing with more of an organic medium.
Hmm.
There's I mean, this is me speaking personally. There's a lot of room for error with soil.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
Are you using the right soil? Is it chunky enough for the plant that you're trying to grow in it? I mean, there's
Hmm.
just so many different takes on people are amend it with this or amend it with that. To me,
Yeah.
Pond just works so well for me. And
Hmm.
of course, there's trial and error. But once you get it down, and that's why I always recommend people just start with one plant. And then once you get that one down, if you find it easy, if you think that it's growing well
Hmm.
for you, then transfer another one and see how it does.
Let's go more into the transitioning side of things because, when someone buys a plant, invariably, unless, you've got a cutting or something, it will be a plant that's living in soil from the nursery or the
Hmm.
plant shop or whatever it is. And invariably, we then all have to learn the skill of transitioning that plant from its organic medium into the pon or the leca or whatever. So, how do you transfer a plant from soil to pon?
I'll touch on this and I won't make it too long. So I'll try to break it down so people can really understand. The most
Hmm.
important thing that you have to remember is that you're transferring something from something that it's used to into a new
Hmm.
environment.
Hmm.
That's gonna it's gonna take time to adjust. And I think that's one
Hmm.
thing that people need to practice is just to have a little patience with it. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to get used to it overnight. But my fail-proof way method is one, you definitely have to assess the plant that you're transferring first. Look at the roots. Are
Hmm.
the roots healthy? I say that semi-hydro roots or passive hydro roots are different from soil roots. Some people like to
Hmm.
get technical and they say, well, technically, soil roots grow in water, but we won't get into that. Fail-proof method. Water.
Yes, let's not.
Yeah. Fail-proof method is just make sure that your roots are clean. Brew a
Hmm.
cup of coffee, make yourself a cup of tea, grab yourself a glass of champagne, and you really want to just get all of the soil off because you're transferring something that was an organic matter into a, a water environment. Anything
Hmm.
that's left on the roots is organic matter will rot. It will rot your roots,
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
so make sure you clean off your roots. Secondly, I like to do a showering method when I'm transferring my my soil plants into passive hydro. And what I like to
Mm-hmm.
do, if you can provide your plant higher humidity, by all means, please do. I
Mm-hmm.
get plants that are already kind of big, and I'm not able to provide them higher humidity. But what I do is I give them, I gradually water them, and this is the important thing is you don't automatically give them a reservoir in whatever vessel you're providing for them. And so I water them gradually and and you have to monitor them, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you're transferring them, you're giving them a new environment. And I feel like when you lightly water them in the new medium, whether it's leca, whether it's pon, whether it's pumice, whether it's perlite, you can use those things. But if you water gradually, then you leave your plant to do the work of adapting to its environment, because
Mm-hmm.
it's going to
Mm-hmm.
have to grow new roots, and that's just what it is. So I tell people keep an eye on it and gradually water with a showering method. Keep an eye on it. Maybe as soon as it starts to dry out, then you water a little bit more, and you just keep it
Okay.
hydrated.
I'll stop you right there for a sec and I'll bring you back a little bit. So, you've introduced a new term here. You've introduced the shower method. Can you explain exactly what you do? And by that, I mean, so for example, I've got my new little plant today and I clean off the roots like you suggest, and they're as clean as I can get them without me
Mhm,
damaging them. And then
mhm.
I've put it in the pond. And then what do I do? How does the shower method translate into what I do today, what I do tomorrow, what I do next week, and when do I put that reservoir on?
Great question. So I technically don't give my plants a water reservoir until I'm either able to lift up the cachet pot and see that there's new roots in it, depending on what plant you're
Mm-hmm.
growing, because you can't really mess with alocasias. You can't really do that to begonias, because they're really sensitive with their root systems. But usually, I feel like when my plant gives me a new leaf, I feel like it's already adjusted to its environment.
Mm-hmm.
And I do gradual watering, and I make sure that it's hydrated and it's not. I don't give it a reservoir until I see, like, okay, it's probably happy in its new environment because it's giving me a new leaf. It's ready, and
Mm-hmm.
it's showing signs of growth in
Growth,
its new
yeah.
environment. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's when I'm like, okay, now you're ready for a water reservoir. I feel like people make the mistake of automatically giving their transferred plant a water reservoir,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's the biggest mistake that people make. They're like, oh, well, it's pond, it's self-watering pot,
It'll
just
be fine.
fill.
Yeah.
And you're I mean, you wouldn't like to be submerged underwater when you're not
All
used
right,
to it.
I'm gonna take you back again because I really wanna tie you down to this. You still, in my mind, this is ignorant me who's starting off on my pond journey, and
Hmm.
I've got the gist of when I need to put the reservoir, but I don't quite know what you mean when you say I water it gradually. How do I know? I've put my plant in pond today. How do I know
Hmm.
when I need to water it again using the shower method? Because how do I get from day one to day 20 when I finally put my reservoir in? How many waterings am I doing? What cues am I looking for? That kind of thing.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So what you really want to look for is the color of the pond, because it
Mm-hmm.
will change colors when it's starting to dry out. So you'll get like
Mm-hmm.
it'll turn like an ashy gray.
Okay.
And to me, that's a good indicator that you probably need to shower your pond and make sure that it's hydrated fully again, and then
Mm-hmm.
giving it a
Mm-hmm.
couple of days to dry out, but not completely dry
Right.
out. That'll give it
Okay.
time. That'll give your roots time to kind of grow into the medium. And that's why I always recommend people to start with one plant, because you do kind of have to baby it for a little bit.
I think that is quite clear now in terms of what someone does. So you put your plant in the pond, you water it, you shower it. So showering meaning water. You water it
Yes.
completely from the top. The whole pond is completely dry. It's seeping through at the bottom. You let that dry out, drain out, and then you put
Hmm.
it where it's going to live and have it live there for
Yes.
a while. Keep checking on
Hmm.
it, and then when you see that that color's changed to a little bit ashy, it looks like it's drying out, go do the same thing again and keep doing that until you see the roots coming out, and then you put a reservoir. Am I right?
I would say that's correct, or until you see new growth, and then I would say that
Until
your
new
plant
growth.
is
Yes.
basically
Yes.
letting you know, like, hey, I'm this is
I'm
good for me
good.
here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Cool. Fabulous. I get it. Next question is, can you use the long method for transitioning plants to pon? So
I
I'll
think
clarify this a little bit just for those people who don't know what the long method is. So the long method is purely a method where you get a plant that's living in soil, you take it out of the soil, you put it in a water environment. You either give some water or some a rooting solution and allow those roots either A to adapt to that environment or B die off and the plant grows new roots. And those new roots are adapted to that water environment and they're happy to live there. And then you take that plant with the new roots and put it in pon. That's the question. Can you do that with pon?
yes. I have
Mm-hmm.
seen people have success starting off their plants like that.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, right? I'm not a scientist, but this is in my opinion. I feel like when you take a soil plant, put it in water, I
Mm-hmm.
feel like you're just dramatically shocking it by
Mm-hmm.
completely changing it.
Mm-hmm.
I personally feel that if you settle it in its new medium,
Mm-hmm.
and you can use the long method to gradually shower, gradually water it. I feel like your
Mm-hmm.
roots, it gives your roots a better chance to start new in its
Mm-hmm.
medium instead of
Mm-hmm.
being completely shocked and being like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, I
What's
was
going on?
going from, yeah, what's going on? And
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people run into more problems when they're like, a lot of people recommend people, they're like, well, put it in water first for
Mm-hmm.
two
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
weeks and let it grow roots. And I'm like,
Yep.
I mean, it's going to grow roots. Yeah, I mean, because you're taking it out of soil and the plant's going to be like, whoa, what's going on? Like, I got to grow
Mm-hmm.
roots, got to kill off my old ones. So I feel like
Yes.
you're staggering the process along a little bit better. And
Mm-hmm.
if you take your time by keeping an eye on your plant, keeping an eye on your medium, making sure that you're watering when it's gradually drying, then
Yep.
I feel like it's a little bit faster to transition
Mm.
your plants into passive
Mm.
hydro.
I'll
You know,
challenge you a little bit here. You talked about your cloner and how when you get a plant and it looks like it doesn't have very good roots, you put it in the cloner. How does that work?
hmm
How is that different?
well, that's a cloner with an air stone. So I definitely think, a lot of people swear like when they have root rot, even in soil, a lot of people use air stones to rehab their plants. I've
Mm.
gotten some plants in really bad shape, broken the rule of, oh, don't instantly repot your plant. But, I know that I'm switching over to passive hydro.
Yeah.
And with an air stone, I think it helps anything with root rot if you're trying to
Yeah.
save it. I think Pon and Leca are great for cuttings as well. I feel like they
Mm-hmm.
get super fast root growth with cuttings. So I think that's how it differs a little bit.
Hmm. So when you're using your cloner with the air stone, is that I'm assuming that the air stone is in water, right? Just to clarify.
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
Okay.
yeah.
So I guess it's just a matter of almost even semantics in a way because I mean obviously full confession I am for the long method 100%.
hmm
So I put a lot of my plants through the not a lot actually most of my plants go straight into leca, no questions about it. I don't even use the shower method and I talk a lot about why not in a lot of forums. But I definitely, if you are using the long method, putting a plant into water or a rooting solution using an air stone ups the
Immediately,
ante
it's a game
100%.
changer. Absolutely.
Exactly. So if you're doing it that way, for sure. And so if I was doing this, and most of the plants I moved to pon, I hardly need to do that anyway. But if
hmm
I needed to, for sure I would, because I think if you can get roots on a plant that are used to living in a certain environment and moving them anywhere, you're halfway there.
Yeah, of course.
Mm,
I agree.
mm. But for sure, no, definitely the long method isn't for everyone. And I definitely hear you on your reservations about that. Next question. When can you transfer a plant from soil to pon, for example? If it comes in a small, maybe 3-inch pot, how do you know it's time? Do you move like really, really tiny plants, or do you wait for the plants to get a little bit bigger? When do you do that?
I have had success transferring different types of plants at different sizes. I would definitely say to start them off younger, just because to me they grow so much faster in passive hydro. I mean, I
Yeah.
get leaves constantly in passive hydro. Like there's not any single time I wake up in the morning and I'm like, oh wow, new leaf. I would definitely say your first assessment of any plant, whether there's a size or not, is definitely you want to really look at the roots and see what you're working with
Mm,
first. But I haven't had any trouble transferring a mature plant down to a seedling um,
yeah.
into into passive hydro. You just definitely want to practice your long method or your watering method
Mm,
in transferring, and I think that really is the key to success in
yeah.
transferring any
Yeah.
plant.
Yeah. But I think
It's
you
that
hit the nail
transition.
on the head there. It's the root system. What kind of root system are you working with? If you've got one
Mhm.
teeny tiny root that's as thin as a violin string, you know, that's
Yeah, you
asking a
might
bit
want
too
to.
much for the little thing to do.
Yeah, you might definitely want to throw that in some water with some nutrient solution.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so what for you have been the most difficult plants to transition from soil to pond?
Okay, let's see. What are my failures? Okay, I will say I have three failures that I always tell people because people are always like, "Can I grow this in pond? Can I grow this in pond? Can I grow that in pond?"
Yeah.
I pond an orchid did not do well for me in pond,
Yeah.
and it makes sense because they
Too damp.
grow on trunks and things like that, and they like their roots. That didn't do well for me in pond. Oddly enough, I had a peace lily
Mm.
that melted on me in pond, but that was a trial and error from my transitioning because I automatically gave it a water reservoir because I'm like, it's a
Yeah.
peace lily, like
It's a
they
peace
love
lily.
water.
Yep.
Yeah. Wasn't even thinking that it was gonna be dramatic, but that one took me a while. And then as soon as it regrew roots, I put it back in pond and it was great. Like it
It was
was
fine.
happy as can be. And then the third one, I'm part of the my local begonia society.
Hmm.
I'm the secretary for my local begonia society, and a lot of begonias have extremely thin hair-like roots, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, I can't see them doing well in passive hydro. Like the roots are too delicate and things like that." But the only begonia that hated passive hydro was my Darth Veridiana. I'm sure everybody's seen them. It's like the dark black begonia with like the small like slither of yellow along the leaf, like, but I tell people all the time, like that plant barely likes itself. So I really don't think that it was.
Is
I
that your
really don't think
excuse and you're sticking with it?
that's my excuse that I'm sticking with it. I have it propped now in its own container. She's happy from the original, but that one instantly melted on me. But I think that's even the
Hmm.
most experienced growers have problems with that specific
Yeah.
genus, that specific plant.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, those were the top three that just did not that I had trouble with. I will say. Everything else like
Mm.
phylos,
Works fine.
monsteras, I have banana trees, anthuriums, love it. I have a bunch. Hoyas
Mm.
love it. But yeah, those are the
Oh,
my
just
top
love
three.
anything. How about if I throw this at you? My take on moving any plant from semi-hydro, from soil to semi-hydro, when someone asks me, "Can you grow this in leca or can you grow that?" or "That can't, surely that can't grow." I never look at something as this can't grow. I always think if it hasn't done well, it's probably because of the way I transitioned it or the way I'm maintaining the reservoir. So either
Absolutely.
the transition wasn't good and it was too quick or too whatever, I don't know, or it's too wet. So, for example, that orchid, maybe that's the one where you need to do the shower method forever. That's not to say it can't live in the pond. It's just, it's not convenient for you now. It's just not
Hmm.
sustainable for you to treat it the way it needs to be treated in that medium. So I always think it's not the medium, it's how you work with it and whether it's sustainable for you or not. And then if
Hmm.
not, then oh well, you move on to something else.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I have I have cacti in pon. I have my aloe
Mm,
vera in pon. Of
Yeah.
course, I don't give them a water reservoir. And
Exactly,
those,
exactly. So one
yeah,
wouldn't think that a cacti would grow in pond because you're thinking, oh my
hmm,
God, the thing will explode because of all that
yes,
water, right?
yeah,
But it's, you just said you don't give it a reservoir. And that's coming down
hmm,
to reservoir management, how you're keeping that plant hydrated and you're controlling that.
absolutely, yes. And
Mm.
I think that
And
also comes with, it comes with experience. It comes with more
it
knowledge.
does. It
You know,
does. It does. It ultimately does because I mean, when I started, I was whacking a reservoir into everything. I was putting
yeah,
everything in the submerged setup because that's what I was doing. And invariably, even now, almost all my plants are in a submerged setups. I hardly use wicks, but there are instances where I do use a wick. I'll be like, for this plant, heck no, I'm definitely using a wick.
you
Or for this
modify it
plant,
to
I
the
am
plant's needs.
definitely not using Pon because I want it to be a lot drier. So
Uh
there's
huh.
just different plays on things, understanding what each different medium does, what roots require for each specific plant, what the roots require, and so on. So it's a very interesting way of growing. I think it's very, there's always something to think about.
Yes, of course. I know.
Mm.
I know. You asked me the three what plants don't do well in pond or passive hydro. I will say the easiest are monsteras, your pothos. Loved it. So I would recommend if someone
Come on,
is
you gotta
trying.
chuck in a Hoya there. You gotta chuck in a Hoya, and you've gotta chuck in
And a
even the
Hoya
philodendrons. Yeah, yeah.
and a
Those
and a
plants
philodendron
just,
for sure.
yeah,
Oh, a
yeah.
philodendron
They
will
just,
outgrow your space so quickly in passive hydro.
yes,
So quickly.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. They're awesome. So someone wants to know, why do some people say you don't need to remove every trace of soil for pon like you do with leca? You just talked about how you have to clean the roots very well and remove all the organic matter. But this person says that a lot of people say you don't. And I follow that up by saying, I know that definitely, I think even the chooser, when they're demonstrating how to move a plant from soil into pon, you literally just take the plant, just get the root ball and just straight into the pon. So
Oh wow. I did not know that.
yeah, I think
I
so. I think I've seen their videos. They just take the plant, just sort of shift the excess and just take it as they're not going to wash off anything.
really that's interesting.
Mm.
I mean, I'm sure eventually with so many waterings, I'm sure you would get all the stuff off the roots, but that's so
Yes.
interesting to me. Yeah, that's so interesting to me because I really think that anything that has organic matter is just it's what's going to happen to anything that's organic in water.
Mm.
It's just going to go bad. So that's really interesting. I've never
Mm.
tried that before, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't recommend it.
Well,
I'll
I have
you know
actually. I actually have. And
have
I
you
my advice for when people are moving plants from soil to leca is get the organic matter off as much as you can. And I my
of
favorite
course.
line is we are not going for clinically clean here. But what I've done a little thing where, and this was a video I did based off a video that the Swedish plant guys did using pumice. And they're talking about just using pumice as a substrate. And they just literally just get the plant, just take it out of the pot and straight into the pumice, and that's it, you're done. And I've
Hmm.
done that with my African violets, and those plants are still very much alive. Did not skip a beat. I don't have any fungus gnats or anything like that. So, but then I will say I have those plants in a wick setup. I'm not sure whether the
Uh,
Swedish plant guys had theirs in a wick setup. So it's not that water is not getting to the root ball. So I think that makes all the difference. The
the
aeration
difference.
and the fact that the water is not getting to the root ball makes the difference. Whereas if you get that and just whack it and you've got your reservoir so high up, I think you would run into problems.
We're not going to be able to get everything completely off of the root system, but we
Mm,
do want to rinse everything to the best of our ability.
exactly,
And
exactly.
I think African violets kind of love to be hydrated. I don't own one, but I've heard that they can
Mm.
be pretty thirsty plants.
Yeah, they do drink a fair bit. I've got African violets. I've got African violets in a mineral blend. So something like Pon, I've got African violets in Leca only, living in a submerged
Uh-huh.
setup. So they do very well as well. So it's just very
Okay.
interesting what plants can adapt to, honestly.
I agree. Yeah, of course. And they,
Yeah.
I always tell people like plants are resilient and so are you. And like a plant will adapt. A plant will adapt. It will, I mean, it will definitely find a way to live, you know?
It finds a way. Life always finds a way. It'll be like, okay, boys and girls, this is what we're dealing with. We got to put our big girl pants on, and we're just gonna thrive
Yeah,
here, despite everything.
exactly. Whatever's thrown at us, we're going to make it work.
Exactly, exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So now, suitability for different plants. Which plants should not be grown in pond? Is there anything that pond is an absolute no-no?
Orchids is the only thing. I'm looking around my house and I believe I have I, I've had every genus in pond. Anything that you can get at your local garden shop, I've
Yeah.
either had it or I've had it in pond. But definitely
Okay. So
orchids did not.
orchids are your nemesis. Orchids are just the ones that you. I can't speak to orchids. I am not an orchid lover, and I do not apologize for it.
Yeah,
And I haven't tried them at all.
yeah,
I know, like you said, orchids are epiphytic, so I would think that
correct.
pond would be a bit too dense and too wet for them to survive
Hmm.
if you're not doing the shower method. Aside from that,
Hmm.
I don't know. Can my fine rooted plants like begonia do well in pond? So you wanna talk to a little bit about that? You,
Yeah,
Mr. Secretary
yeah, of
of the
course.
Begonia Society.
Yes. So I have I have wonderful mentors in my begonia society. There's a lot of people that I look up to. Don Miller is one of them. He has very well known hybridizer of begonias. He's created a bunch of begonia hybrids, and I actually, when I first started the society, I told him I was like, "Oh, I have cane begonias growing in pond," and he was just like, he looked so puzzled, and he was just like,
Yeah.
"Really?" And I was like, "I kid you not." I'm like, they are doing great in it. And so he was like, well, he's like, I wonder how Rhizomatous one would do. And I was like, you know what? Give me a couple of months. I'll get
I'm
back
gonna
to you.
try it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna try it. I tried a Ferox. I tried Milano Bulata. All did extremely well. So I will say that they throw a little bit of a fit when you transfer them, because it's so hard not to damage any of the roots because they're just so fine. But they definitely do love passive hydro, and it almost I think you given me an idea to do an experiment and actually try to have one in Lica and see how that does. Do you are you growing begonias in Lica?
Yeah, I have a massive begonia downstairs in my basement. I've got like I think it's a cane begonia. It's got maybe 8 branches and it's just
Oh
fanning the
wow,
whole wall. It's fanning, it's flowering, it's giving me seed pods. I want to germinate the seed pods.
yeah.
It's insane.
And I know people say that begonias do flower frequently, but I feel like they flower a lot more in a passive or semi hydro setup. That's just me
Well,
because I have
my
begonias that are
take
constantly flowering.
Of course. I mean, my take on all of this, once you can get the plant adapted, so even the ones with like very, very, yes, I mean, even the cane begonias have very fine roots. But if you can transition one, into
Hmm.
pon or into pumice by, not disturbing the roots too much, just putting it directly
Hmm.
like the method I described to you, it will respond and it will grow. Once you've got the
Yeah.
other conditions right, you've got the light. Begonias love hydration, they love food. And these are the things that are constant in semi-hydro. That's the whole point of semi-hydro. That's why plants
Hmm.
do so well. They've got that
Well.
water
Hmm.
consistently. It's consistent. It's not whether you are watering it on Saturday and then you're coming back again on Saturday and it's been dry for the last 2 days, you know and then you're not
Exactly.
fertilizing at the beginning of spring and fertilizing again at the beginning of spring a year
Yeah.
later.
Exactly. It's a consistent routine. And I
Yeah.
will say, if you are scared to kill your begonia in soil, the easiest way to propagate a begonia is in water, and then you can
Yep.
easily transfer it to your choice of medium, whether it's Pon
Of
or whether
medium.
it's Leca,
Exactly.
and then it'll be a breeze transferring that. So I always
Hmm.
recommend that
Hmm.
too. Like just take a piece of it, prop it, and then transfer that plant so you don't so you don't damage your mama plant.
Do you recommend large plants like monsteras for Pon or Leca?
I can't. Okay, I will say this. I have my mama Monstera in Pon and she's doing great. But for the viewers, everyone's watching, you showed me your huge birds of paradise. And I was
Yeah.
like, whoa. I was like, okay, now I'm really motivated to try that because I'm actually gonna probably do that with my banana tree actually because it's going to be impossible to keep up potting that in Pon. And so you've actually inspired me to try that with my two banana trees that I have in here that are growing. So
Yep.
I'm gonna
You should
be
try it.
reaching out to you. Yeah, because
No
that's
problem.
so impressive.
They'll work. They'll work well. So I guess the answer to this question is you can have monsteras in Pon and in Leca. But I
Of
guess the
course.
disadvantage with having them in Pon is when you're repotting and that plant gets bigger and bigger, you need more Pon, and that might end
Hmm.
up being a little bit pricey for you to add
Yes.
heaps and heaps and heaps of Pon. Whereas if
Yes.
your leca is so much cheaper than ponies, so you can
Hmm.
afford to have half a bag of leca for one plant.
Yes, I
So
agree with that. And then also, if you are doing a DIY pond, those are chunkier, tend to be
mhm.
chunkier because the size of the size of the mineral rocks that you're getting are a little bit bigger. So that can be a cheaper route.
That would be
But
heavy though, wouldn't it? That would be very heavy.
oddly enough, the chunkier stones are actually lighter
No, not
than
the chunkier
because
stones. I mean, just like pon in general. If you're just using pon to put up a very big
yeah.
plant,
Yeah, I have one in a 10-gallon pot, and it's doing great. But yes, it is heavy, so that is
it's
something to note.
very very heavy, which is very compared to leca. And I know a lot of people think leca is heavier. Leca actually isn't. Pon
It
is
looks
heavier
like
than
that.
leca. It looks like
Agreed.
that, but
Yes.
it's not because of all the air holes in the little bowls. So leca is
Hmm.
so much lighter. So from a moving stuff perspective, you probably might want to grow it more in leca because then that plant is a little bit more mobile as opposed to growing
Yes.
it in pond. But another thing I'll throw in there, which you alerted me to, is also people think that it's not going to be stable when it's growing in leca. If the plant is very
Yes.
big, it might not be stable, and that is not true at all. When the plant starts to grow and the roots start to grow into the leca, they all form one big mass, and it's all just really, really stable. And you can move it, and your plant won't fall down. So yes, you can grow your big plants in pon or leca, depending on what you
Yeah,
want to
we'll
do.
say massive. We'll say massive plants because that's not a big plant. That's a massive
Oh
plant. That's
yeah, okay, yes, you can grow your massive plants like the ones I have, massive ones. So, can you grow a tropical epiphytic cacti, like a Ripsalis or epiphyllum in pond? Do you have any
No,
epiphyllums?
I do not. And I think you touched on this earlier, which was a really good point, is that if you are growing different types of plants in passive hydro setups, you really just have to pay attention to what the watering needs of that plant are. Could you
Mm,
transfer it to a gravel like medium? I mean, I'm pretty sure a cacti would like that, but it would really depend on your watering frequency and how often you're watering in order to
mhm,
not overwater that plant.
mhm.
And so I definitely think that is it possible? Yes. You'll just have to really do a lot of research on the type of plant and the needs of the plant in order to be
Yeah.
successful.
Pon, I don't know, but I've definitely got an epiphyllum living in Leca.
Hmm.
I've got codex plants. I've got a desert rose living in Leca, and they're all living in a wick setup.
Oh,
So
wow.
they're not sitting submerged in in the reservoir. They're using a wick to get that nutrient to the plant. So again, managing of the reservoir. That really is
Yes.
the key. Have you ever transferred an alocasia? This is a very specific question. An alocasia from tissue culture to pon or leca. Have you tissue culture?
I will from tissue culture. I will
Yes, it's
say
specifically about deflasking and all that loveliness.
in pure pawn, I can't say that I have. I cannot
Mm-hmm.
say that I have. I have transferred it into similar mediums, like using stratum and perlite, but
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
pawn. And the only reason that I don't recommend that is because if you're using lechuza, it does have built-in fertilizer, and I'm not sure how
Mm-hmm.
great the small TC can handle that. But a lot of TC growers I see, it's like stratum and perlite or
Mm-hmm.
tree fern with perlite.
Yep.
So directly into pon, I would say no. Pon is on the heavier side, and you want to be really careful with pon, especially with small starter plants, especially with things like TC. I definitely would agree that it would be too heavy for that.
Yeah, yeah, and I've never specifically. Well, first TC, no. Alocasia, no. This is going straight into LECA. No, I have definitely not done that. I think it's just yeah, no. I've got other things to do with my life than baby plants like that because it
And
would be a
especially
baby thing.
alocasias.
Yeah,
Yes,
no,
yeah. I
no.
mean,
Good
I
luck to you. Let us know how you go.
yes, yeah. Leave in the comments how it goes because
Yes.
allocations
Yeah.
throw a fit if you look at them wrong. Honestly, like yeah, they
Yeah.
can be a
Yeah.
little,
Just
they can be a little dramatic.
extra. Yes. So let us
Like oh,
compare Pon and Leca. So we're going to play a game. You're going to be for Pon, and I'm going to be for Leca. And we're going to see. I mean, obviously, we can't score because we don't have someone independent, but how does Pon compare to Leca? So let's go. Cost.
pawn is more expensive.
For sure. This
Yes.
is true. All right. Give me something where Pon wins.
Well, you stumped me on that one.
I think the learning curve is not as steep as it is for Leca.
I do recommend people to not immediately jump into fertilizing their plants in something that doesn't have a built-in fertilizer because I see a lot of people like over fertilizing their plants. So I will say that it takes the guessing game. Yeah, I will say that pond takes the guessing game out of that
Yeah, there's a
for
bit
sure.
of the learning curve is not as steep as Leca because if you get a pond that's got built-in fertilizer, all you can do is just put your plant there and pretty much almost treat it like soil as long as you're managing the watering and you'll be good to go. Whereas with Leca from day one, you're talking about pH, if you need to, all that kind of stuff, which might be a little bit overwhelming for a beginner. So, in that
Hmm.
way, Pon wins. Let's
Yeah.
talk about pots and how Pon, depending on what kind of pot you're using, it can seep out of the bottom of the pot, and that is tends to be rather annoying and wasteful
With you said
with
with
Pon, depending on the pot that you're using. If you've got lots of holes in your nursery pot at the bottom, and you put your Pon in, and you keep putting the Pon in, and it keeps falling out, and you keep putting it in, and it keeps falling out.
I definitely I definitely tell people it's like I definitely tell people make sure that you research what your growing medium requires. You know, like
Mm,
if you're going to get a smaller pond, then definitely you don't want to use cachet pots with slits in it. Yes, you're going to run into that problem.
yeah.
And, so definitely. But I feel like self watering pots are kind of standard, across,
Well,
kind of across.
it depends. It's a bit harder to find self-watering pots, right? So I generally
Hmm.
use what I've got, what's around me, what's available in my store, normal nursery pots. And they have these pre-made, really big, much bigger holes at the bottom. They've got smaller ones and then
Hmm.
they've got much bigger ones that I can't do anything about. So when I'm putting my pond in there, they fall through the pond. The
Yes.
pond falls through
Yeah.
the holes. So
Yeah.
there's nothing I can do about that. But anything else that you can think of that's different between Leca and pond?
How often do you deal with mineral buildup?
There's a lot of mineral buildup. on I like to be very specific in the things that I
Uh huh.
say, right? So people will say, yeah, Leca has a lot of mineral buildup. And I'll say, well, no, it depends. It depends on one, your water. What's the base water that you're dealing with? If your water is heavy water and has a lot of calcium and all sorts of total dissolved solids in it, then yeah, probably you will get a lot of deposits on your leca, right? So if you're using distilled water or reverse osmosis water, that takes that out of the equation. So you'll get less.
Correct.
Yeah. Second,
Correct.
it depends on how much nutrients you're putting in your water, how the
Mm-hmm.
concentrations and things. So if it's highly concentrated, then you're more likely to get the buildup on your leca. True. Three, it depends on how often you flush, how you rinse your leca. So it is highly
True.
recommended to flush and to rinse your leca at least once every 2 weeks, once every month, whatever you can manage. If you don't do that, then the chances are it's going to build up. It doesn't matter how dilute you make your solution, it will build up. And I know
Correct.
you're going to say that it doesn't do that as much in porn.
I have not. Of course, I have experienced in like. Of
Yeah.
course, it happens, but I've never. I feel like even when people get it wrong with Pon, I feel like
Mm-hmm.
the different mineral stones do such a good job of balancing and buffering
Mm-hmm.
the pH in it.
Because I've seen some people say that Pon doesn't get as much buildup as Leca does.
I will say that it doesn't because it's a good buffer for the minerals with the minerals. I mean, with the mineral rocks that Pon uses. So I think that's
Could it be
probably
also
why.
that it's harder to identify the mineral buildup in Pon than it is in Leca? It's easier to see.
That may be true. That may be true.
Hmm, I think maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know. We have no way of verifying anything, but I don't know. We'll never know, but I think so. But I think we can all agree that best practice is flush when you can.
absolutely. That is your best practice, yes. And as
Mm-hmm.
frequently as you can. As frequently
Mm-hmm.
as you can. Because a lot of
Not like
people,
not like me.
it happens, right? I mean, it's hard to stay on top of our plants sometimes. I really am a firm believer in that. And I will say water as frequently as you can. I feel like for me, Pon is more forgiving when I don't. But
Mm-hmm.
who are we really to know? Ultimately, I know that it's time for me to flush because my plant is not growing.
Yeah.
And you can start seeing signs of it. You know
Your
that
plant will tell
you're
you that it's not happy. So and I
yeah.
in as much as we're talking about best practice, we've also talked about it's hard to keep on top of things. And
Hmm.
my plant care ethos is that your plant care should fit into your lifestyle and not the other way
Absolutely.
around. And I'm all for people who go gung ho and doing the absolute mostest for their plants. More power to them. But I've got 3 kids, I've got a job, I've got this YouTube, and I've got like 6 million plants, and I hardly ever flush my plants. I flush them sometimes, but nowhere near what I say you should, right?
Of
Are my
course.
plants
Yeah.
thriving? Yes. Could they be thriving even more? Maybe,
Uh,
possibly.
hmm.
Can I live with it? Yes. So what can you live with?
Exactly. And I always tell people there's 24 hours in a day.
Yeah.
Um, it's great if you don't, work a full-time job, if you don't go to school, if you don't,
Yeah.
Planned Parenthood is all part. It's another job. It's a duty,
It's
and
a
you do your
lifestyle.
best.
Yeah.
It's a lifestyle, and you do your best. And as long as your plants are doing good, and that's all we can look forward to.
Okay, now this question I think is for me. Under what circumstances would you shift from leca to pon? Yeah, I've moved some plants over from leca to pon. One that comes to mind is my Oxalis triangularis. This plant was I got it, I transitioned it from soil to leca. It was doing well. It was okay. I just didn't think it was living its best life. I just thought
Okay.
that it wasn't getting as much moisture as it needed. But then again, coming to think of, so I moved it from leca to pon. But looking at back at it now, I'm thinking, well, maybe it was actually just because it was living in a wick setup, and I should have just moved it to a submerged setup instead of going straight to pon. but I went straight to Pon. So that's whatever. It's fine now. I think it's doing a lot better because the roots of an Oxalis triangularis are very, very thin, but it's a very thirsty
Mm,
plant. So I thought
okay.
Pon might be a way to go, which I did, and that plant is now thriving. But I would another plant I actually would move from Leca to Pon is my spider plant. I would do that actually with my spider
Oh, that would
plant.
be a good one, actually.
I've got a very big spider plant. The spider plant, I water my spider plant. I fill up the reservoir of my spider plant literally every week or every 5 days or every 6 days. It's such a thirsty plant. I just can't
Hmm.
keep on top of keeping that reservoir full. I swear, I fill it in the morning and in the evening it's all gone. So I'm thinking maybe having it living in Pon might be a good way to go. So Pon in a submerged setup as well. I just want to get it wet so that it's
Yeah.
just got that moisture in because the window between the reservoir being empty and the plant beginning to show signs of it having no water is very, very narrow. It doesn't give me a second to,
Yes.
yeah. So yeah, that's the only reason I would move a plant over from leca to pon, just if I wanted the plant to have more moisture than it already has, because that's what pon would provide.
Yes. Yeah. That is another thing to note too. Is
Mm.
that pond will hold on to moisture longer because it is smaller. It's not as
Yep.
airy, which
Yep.
is why I love it because I don't have to water as frequently.
Mm.
I love my plants, but I don't want to have to water them frequently, and I mean
As
like
that lady
every other
said,
day
ain't
or
nobody got time for that.
exactly. Nobody has time for that.
No.
And if you
Okay.
do, more power to you.
More power to you. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about care and maintenance of pond now. Just a little bit about that. So, do you let it dry out between waterings? So this person actually said like leca, which actually no, we don't let leca dry out between waterings. Just to clarify, we don't do that. So I don't know if you do that with pond. Do you do that, or do you keep it constantly
Absolutely.
moist?
Yes. So there, just like there's wet root rot, there is dry rot.
Dry rot. Yep.
Um, we have to remember that if we're growing things in semi hydro and passive hydro, that means that there is constant water, there's constant moisture for the root system. If the root system gets dry, you will have dry rot. So I say some people are like, oh, well, I couldn't keep up with that. To me, my watering schedule is a breeze. I water every week and a half. I look over at my pond, make sure that it's hydrated, and I'm good. So we do not let anything in a semi hydro, passive hydro setup or medium to dry out because you will experience dry rot and you will run into some issues with your plant.
Well, having wet dry cycles is all the rage, though. I mean, people talk about wet dry cycles a lot, especially people growing their plants in potting mix or in soil. What do you think about that?
You know, being someone who killed so many plants in soil because I was underwatering, I was overwatering. I can attest to that.
Mm.
I mean, some plants are thirstier than others. I will give it that. But to give it a dry spell, it's just kind of why I went into passive hydro because it kind of takes the guessing game out of that. You know,
Takes the
you
guessing
just
game out
know
of it and gets that consistency. Consistency.
it's yeah. You stick to something and it's just consistent, and you keep going with it.
One of the things I think with, especially with people that promote wet dry cycles, I think maybe that works okay for people growing their plants in a soil environment or a potting mix environment. Those plants are used to, they get watered, that soil holds on to a lot of moisture depending
Hmm.
on, the makeup of the potting mix, how many amendments and blah, blah, blah. It holds on
Hmm.
to a
Hmm.
lot. So I think it's easy for them to say, when you've got your plant in this self-watering planter, for example, you water it for, you put it up to there and then you leave it and then you don't come back until, 2 weeks later because then you've allowed that dry cycle to come. And I think what that really means is just that soil is still holding on to some of that water that you had in that pot. So even though there isn't any water in the actual reservoir, the soil is still wet.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you then call that the dry cycle, and then you come back after 2 weeks and you water it
Hmm.
again, and you say I had a dry cycle. I don't know. I mean, I'm like you.
Yeah.
I don't advocate for wet and dry cycles. It leaves too much to
It's
chance.
too
You
much
don't
of a
know
guessing game.
when is the dry, when is the wet, when do you go back, when do you just the whole point of semi hydro is the ease of it, the consistency of it. Just always make sure your reservoir's got nutrient solution and you're golden.
And you're golden, whether it's in Leca or in Pon, whatever
But yeah,
works for you.
exactly.
But yes, it's a consistent
Exactly.
routine. It's a consistent
Yeah.
routine.
Okay. Now this is a good one. This is a goodie, an oldie goodie. Should the top of the pond be wet or dry in a reservoir setup? The top.
The top, okay. Does I will say it like this. I thought it was a problem at once. At one point, I was just like, "Whoa!" I'm like, "What's going on here?" Like the top of my pond is not is dry. Like what does the middle of my pond look like? Is it all dried out? I think we have to remember that the top of the pond is getting airflow, and so it's exposed to open air, so that is going to dry out. I will say that it does not hurt to check your medium and make sure that you do have consistent moisture within it. Make sure that everything is hydrating itself. Make sure that it's working in the capillary action that it's meant to work in. It never hurts to double check. But will the top of your pond dry out? Absolutely. As
Mm-hmm,
long as the middle of it is good, you're good to
mm-hmm,
go. And
mm-hmm,
I always top water. So if I do feel like I want to rehydrate the top of it, then of course you can just, you know, glaze a little bit of water over it. And then of course that's going to
mm-hmm,
hydrate everything else
mm-hmm,
anyway, evenly. But yes, you will deal with dry medium at the top.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Same applies with leca. The leca at the top will look dry. It will be dry. It's what's happening around the root ball. It's what's happening with the leca at the bottom and how that capillary action is pulling that nutrient solution from the bottom to the top.
To the
And at the
top.
top, it
Absolutely.
will get dry. So don't worry. As long as you've got nutrient solution in your reservoir,
You're good to go. You're
that's
solid.
what you want. Now, this one we've touched on a little bit. How do you deal with mineral deposits on leca and pon? How do you remove them?
I will start off by saying that I use distilled water for all of my babies. So they kind of are used to distilled water. And I haven't really dealt with mineral buildup, but a sure
Mm-hmm.
way to avoid mineral buildup is a lot of the times when I feel like I'm having an issue with the plant, it's usually because it probably needs to be rinsed out.
Mm,
You'll notice that your plant gets stagnant, and I just usually just rinse out my pond really, really well, make sure that it drains out, and then I provide it some more nutrient solution or just distilled water so it can refresh and rehydrate.
yeah,
So
yeah,
good, just rinsing it out.
yeah. So when we say rinsing it out, we're not saying take the plant out of the pond or the plant out of the leca and rinse that. No, you take the whole pot with the plant and the nutrient solution, put it under the tap, and while you're there, take the opportunity to clean out your plant as well. Wash the leaves, wash the stems, and
Yes, absolutely,
wash out. Take out the cash pot as well. Wash out that reservoir. Just clean everything and put it all back. That is the best way of getting rid of that buildup or that efflorescence. It all just dissolves in the water and washes away. Easy fix.
absolutely, absolutely.
When roots hit the reservoir, how much is too much before you need to repot?
So I think we've touched upon this earlier, right? We were saying that we're busy people, right? You have three little ones. I have a regular 9 to 5, and I have school, and I have all these other events and things like that. So I have fallen victim to my. I'm looking at my plants right now. There's a
Your own
couple that I have
success?
roots in. Yeah, I have roots right now in my reservoir, and your roots are already kind of. They're almost made for that type of medium, so they don't to me, I haven't had any issues with my roots digging into the reservoir. Now, I don't like them to be fully submerged in water. I don't recommend that. But I will say, when you notice that they are starting to grow into your reservoir, all you have to do is just gently take them out of the reservoir, snug them back into themselves, and then put them back in the pot, and then just refill it with pond. But I have not, luckily, I have not had any issues with
So
the
you're for
water,
the
with the roots
school
being
of
in the water.
you're basically repotting, right?
Yes.
Hmm.
I've seen people actually cut off their roots
Mm-hmm.
and the plant still does really well. I don't like to damage the roots if I don't have to. And if I just have to take an extra
Hmm.
step in order to just make sure that the roots are just tucked back in, I will do that. There's been instances
You're
where
a conservative, gentle plant puppy.
I am. And and it was also with trial and error too, because I'm like, a lot of people are like, oh man, if I damage or cut these roots off, like, what is it going to do to my plant? You know.
You're very, very
Luckily,
gentle.
yeah, luckily, roots in passive hydro or semi hydro, they do not really take a toll. It doesn't take a toll on the plant, in my experience. So that's another benefit of.
Like, this is a question I get asked a lot, and I've made so many videos about it. What do you do when the roots start growing into the reservoir? And I generally give three or four generic answers, and the final answer being you do nothing. Okay, you can just jog on your merry way, and that plant is
I love
just
that.
fine because those roots are adapted to living in that environment, and you're good to
Yeah.
go. And in most cases, because I have my plants living in a submerged setup most of the time, I have to do something about the roots because the plant won't sit on the pot nicely because the roots are up there and it's
Because
not
of your setup.
stable because it's
Okay.
all just
Yeah.
blah. But otherwise, I have roots everywhere. I'm trying to see if I can. Oh, yeah, this is a goodie. Look at that.
Those are great, healthy roots.
That is a Thai constellation, and those roots are just. And that's. I have no plans to do anything with this. The first thing is, if you want, you can just cut them like you said. Nothing will happen to the
Hmm.
plant if you're cutting off, less than 30% of the root mass. Just cut them off and it's fine and they'll grow. And then, like you do, if you're so worried about it, you can repot it. I personally don't like to repot unless a plant really needs a repot because, I mean, as you saw, even with this plant, the roots are growing out there, but it's not entirely root bound. There's still a lot of space inside the pot. So technically, I don't need to repot that plant. So all I'm doing is just disturbing the plant for nothing in my mind.
I I would agree
Yeah.
with that.
The next question, though, is some plants push their roots through the drainage holes, right? How do you safely remove them without root damage? Like that plant that I just showed you. There's a whole ecosystem living outside the pot.
I think another thing for people to really note is that when you're growing in passive or semi, your root system is going to be so massive and it's going to grow so quickly. So you're going to run into this problem a lot. It will not hurt your plant if you break off a root or two. Like you said, if it's not more than 30% of the root system, your plant's going to be perfectly fine. I
Mhm.
also love the fact about growing in passive or semi where it you allow less things that are open to bacteria like it is in an organic medium, like with soil
Mhm.
and things like that when people cut off roots and stuff. So they will be fine. And, sometimes it's okay. If whatever breaks off, they're going to regrow.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Probably a lot
That's
more quicker than you expect them to.
definitely a lot more quicker than you expect them to. And I've repotted so many plants over the years where the plant is absolutely root bound. I am banging on the thing trying to get the plant out. I've had to cut off pots because it's so root bound because I have no way of doing it. But even with that, you cut them off and you've got like a huge mass of roots just gets left behind because as you're trying to pull
Mhm.
them out gently, it
It's
just
impossible sometimes.
and it's fine. Your roots, your plants is still fine. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. It is going to be fine. And how to remove them safely without damage? You try and do it very gently. If
Yeah,
not,
just
you could be as gentle as anything and you will still get damage, and that's okay.
that's okay. Your plant will be fine.
How do you deal with plants that are grown with a plug? You know that plug that people hate, that mesh that they that put around. It's either a mesh or some foam that they grow the starter plants in. That people call them the plug of death.
Yeah, the plug of death.
Yeah.
Uh,
So, do you leave
um,
the plug in, or do you put the whole thing in the pond? What do you do with the plug?
so I do not leave the plug in Pon. I A lot of people call it the plug of death, right? There are different plugs though. They're, the one that's really generally used in big, like big box stores, and then there's like root starter plugs, which
Yeah,
are a lot easier to remove.
yeah. Mm,
Um, Again, be as gentle as you can be. I would recommend to remove the plug before switching it over to Pon. Again, I also would say that if you do have a plug, look at your root system first. Is it big enough to handle the
the
damage
removal.
that you're the removal? Yeah, because if you don't see roots coming out of the plug, you might not want to even mess with it yet.
Yeah.
Let's talk about roots that are actually growing out of the plug. Then that's how you know that your plant is basically ready for a new medium, or for a
That's
new
right.
pod and things like that. So just
That is
just
so true.
yeah, ask, assess your roots, see what you're working with, and then go from there. And if it's
Yeah.
growing fine in that plug, then just let the root system get just a little bit bigger.
No, I agree. I remove plugs as well. I think, I mean, like you say, you just don't want to have stuff in there that can harbor things, harbor bacteria, harbor growing things that
Anything,
will invariably
harbor
lead to
bugs,
rot.
anything.
Can you use leca as a bottom layer and pon on top for plants like ferns and fitonias?
I personally do not use. I would say that people are probably using that as a drainage layer.
Well, maybe not even as a drainage layer. I know people who use it as just a pond conservation layer. Just like, okay, I'm going to have my pond at the top
Ah,
and have the cheaper substrate at the bottom so I can stretch out my pond for more plants.
are can you do it? Yes, probably. I'm really big, and I think we talked about this
Yeah.
earlier. I'm really, really big on having a consistent medium. I feel like when you're trying to grow something that is relying on capillary action, you want that to be consistent throughout your whole root system. I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of the times when people mix mediums, that's when they start having problems. Because if you
Problems.
have an inconsistency in your medium and your root gets too dry, then and then it gets too wet, then that's when problems start occurring. Can you? I'm not going to
Yes,
say
you can do
no.
you can do anything
You
you
can.
like. Yes.
Yes.
Should you?
I wouldn't. I would say let's stick to having a consistent medium, right? I think our word throughout some of this has been consistency. We like to have good consistency, so let's just stick to a good, consistent medium. And if you do want to try something and it does work out for you, I mean, then just do it with something that you might not, mind losing, or something that you don't mind experimenting with. But it doesn't hurt to try.
I love how you're gentle and you're diplomatic as well.
It's part of who I am. Because I always tell
Like,
people,
no,
I'm like,
don't do that.
I always tell people, I'm like, go ahead, try it. Let me know, like, and please get back to me and let me know how it worked out.
No, the
Because it's
theory
all
the
trial and
theory
error.
is very sound, and I love exactly how you put it. So it's you're just not sure whether you're going to get that balance of moisture across the root system because one spot might be a little moisture than another because you've got more pon here or more leca on that side, and what that's
Hmm.
going to do to your root system. But in theory, it's sound. The theory is sound. How it actually
Hmm.
works out is something that you can only discover. So have at it and let us know how you go. Or if you've done
Exactly.
that and are doing that, please let us know in the comments because we'd love to know how that worked out. The only thing I find with doing things like this as well, so as an addition to inconsistencies and all that, is when you're trying to sterilize your substrate. When you're trying to use it for something else, then you've got a mixture of, you've got Pon here, you've got your Leca in there, and it's very difficult to sort of, are you separating them, or are they going to be mixed in forever? So just thinking
Yes.
about things like that as well. Yeah.
Think about
So,
future problems now that you're not going to have if
yeah.
you stick to a medium. Yeah.
Have you used micro Leca?
Micro Leca, are we talking about the small?
Yeah, just a small. So you've got. I mean, Leca comes in many different sizes. Some of them is like this
Mhm.
big. Some of them are like, and then there's like really, really, really tiny ones, and a lot of it is sold for use in aquariums. I've seen people using
Oh,
micro Leca for that, but I personally haven't used micro Leca because I just can't find it here. I would love to use it though.
we might have to make that work if I can find it for you here, but I have not personally used it myself.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
micro leca is so because leca, the theory behind micro leca is that because leca is quite airy, the particles are quite
mhm.
big, and that allows for airflow, which is, of course, one of the things we love about leca. But plants that have got finer roots, like begonias or African violet, ferns, even plants that benefit from having a substrate that retains more moisture and is not as airy, like pon, those plants work well. So if you don't want to go down the pon route, you can try using micro leca. So those particles are a lot smaller, work the same way as leca, and are obviously cheaper. So that's
Oh,
the
okay.
theory behind micro leca. You're gonna love this next one. Have you tried mixing pon with organic matter for a semi-hydro hybrid?
Uh, sorry, no questions, please. Okay, I will say this. I've seen people say, "Oh, I've thrown a little bit of pond in my soil mixture for moisture," and I'm like, okay, I'm like,
Which is different. That is not semi-hydro.
different. I've seen people use tree fern and pond to start seedlings because pond and tree fern are really good at retaining moisture. I've seen that, but
Mhm.
organic matter, no, I have not.
The trick here is you've said to start,
Start,
not
yes,
ongoing.
not ongoing. I mean, of course, when things are starting off, they require more moisture retention and things like that.
Yeah.
But have I seen a full plant in a mixture like that? I have not, and I don't.
Lots of people are doing it, and the flavor of the month right now is especially with Alocasia. So there's this is very big on social media. There's lots of videos on YouTube as well, especially to do with Alocasias and growing plants, growing Alocasias in leca. So they'll have, I think they've got a leca base, and then they'll put some sphagnum moss on top of the leca. So this is in a vase. They'll put some
Uh-huh,
sphagnum
uh-huh.
moss on top of the leca, put the plant on top, fill it up with sphagnum moss, and then hydrate the whole thing and have that reservoir sitting in the leca layer. Right. So that's how the plant
Mhm.
grows, and it's apparently very, very successful.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know what you're talking about now.
Whether it's something, this question is something to do with that, or you're actually mixing in the moss and I don't know.
Well, to answer the question fully, no, I have not. Consistency. Do you want to find something that works for you and you stick with it and you want to be able to evaluate a problem if a problem arises, you want to know. I mean, it'd be great to see long-term growing in that, And I can see why that would work if the moss is on sitting on top of that, then it's probably retaining a lot of the moisture that it's releasing. I can see why it would probably work, but it'd be great to
Yeah.
see long term growing.
So if you take leca, for example, or pon, and you mix in, maybe even cocoa chips, or tree fern fiber, or whatever it is, or you get a mix and you put that in, and you've got your reservoir as well. All that organic matter has got organisms. in it. It's got organisms that are going to be breaking down that organic matter that is going to start messing up your nutrient solution.
Oh, and let's not even talk of.
That's what it's all
Well, I mean,
about, isn't it?
a lot of people say that moss in itself will steal a lot of nitrogen from seedlings and things growing up. Like, I mean, so there's a whole science of that I don't even know, but people say like, oh, moss will steal a lot of nitrogen from your watering solution. So
Well,
that
and I think it's
alone,
the science that matters when you're talking about things like this. When you've got a pure system, and that's what semi-hydro does. That's what hydroponics does. Hydroponics in itself
mhm,
as a pure science is you controlling every single aspect of the growth of this plant. You're controlling the light, you're controlling the air, you're controlling the nutrients right down to the micro
mhm,
whatever, right? And
yeah,
so we sort of in semi-hydro, passive hydro, we're taking a little bit of that. So obviously we're not controlling everything 100%. We don't have the pumps and things, but we're still controlling things with the nutrients. For example, we're controlling the living environment that the plant is in. We know that there's no other microorganisms living in that are going to break down things, and that's why we're not using
correct,
organic fertilizers with our plants in semi hydroponics, right? Because we don't have a
correct,
biome that's going to break them down. So there's a lot of things that go into it apart from just, you throw this in and it'll be fine. It's going to mess up your nutrients. And if it messes up your nutrients, you might even have a nutrient lockout. And if you've got a nutrient
exactly,
lockout, your plants have got no access to that nutrient. And then you turn around and say, well, LECA doesn't work. Well, no, no, no. You put all these things into it and messed up the playing field, and now it's not working. So yes, okay, I should stop now. I'm a little bit passionate about that.
no, I mean it's great. I mean this is all valid points, and then I mean really, I'm thinking about the headache of repotting that.
Fertilizer for pond plants. Do roots grow faster? Mine seem to explode.
Yes, massive root systems, and I think we had talked about this earlier. Also,
We have.
I I am comfortable enough to say that if your roots outgrow your pots, I have very limited space to grow. I will say that if your roots are outgrowing your pot, it is safe to cut them. Of course, you sterilize cutting utensils, of course,
Mhm.
but it is safe to say that you can cut your roots and repot it back in the same pot. You're going to have massive root systems, but that's how you know that you're doing it right. If you have, that's how you know that your plant is happy. It got massive root systems. Fertilize in pond. I would say that the brand that I use of Pon doesn't necessarily break down what kind of fertilizer they use. I know it's a slow release fertilizer, but it doesn't necessarily say what it's providing for the plant. So I always like to give my plants additional fertilizer that's kind of like a broad spectrum of fertilizer like foliage focus that I know that has other included
Yeah.
nutrients for the plants that they need to take out any guessing games.
It doesn't have to be foliage focused. It can be
It does
any
not.
well balanced
Hydroponic
fertilizer or
fertilizer.
nutrients, hydroponics, which has a guaranteed analysis on the bottle so you know what's in there. And I'll go out here and put my neck
Absolutely.
out and say, if your nutrient does not have a guaranteed analysis on the bottle, I would not be using that. What exactly is in it? If they can't tell you what's in
Yes.
it,
Yes. And we're looking for, I would say, for beginners, especially for beginners, try to get a balanced fertilizer to start with because some fertilizers are higher in this, lower in that. It just really depends on what your growing needs are, but definitely do your research. And if you're not growing anything specifically, like fruits, or if you're going to things to flower, then yeah, a general, nice, balanced fertilizer
mm-hmm,
will do you
mm-hmm.
just right.
And does Pon make a difference to roots development compared to leca?
I will say, I think there has to be a slighter difference between Leca and between Pon because Leca is more airy. I feel like you might have slightly faster root growth in Leca
Mm-hmm,
because your roots are getting a lot more oxygen. So I will say that
mm-hmm,
there It is probably a slight difference, but eventually they will be like they're the same in a
Hmm.
sense. But I don't think there's too much of a difference. Like unless we would scientifically take us the same plant with the same nutrients, I mean that would have to really be a study. But essentially, I don't think so. Essentially, I don't think so. I think that essentially they're going to do the same thing.
Yeah, it would definitely have to be a study, and I think anything we would say would just be fluff, honestly. Because, yeah, I mean, we're just speculating, and I was thinking exactly what you were thinking. More airflow in the leca. Do you then get more, of the tertiary roots, the small, small, small roots, because you've got
Hmm.
probably more air root pruning in leca than you would have in pon? I don't know.
Hmm.
It's very highly
Yeah.
debatable. Anywho, um, are plants affected by cold water in winter in semi-hydro setups like pond? Do you have any experience about this?
Okay, I will say this: what I've experienced. Right, I'm talking about growing inside of my home. Definitely stays cool during the summertime. I'm in Texas. If you guys, it's hot. It gets pretty hot here, and it can get kind of chilly. I will say that I have experienced slower growth in the winter months. That doesn't necessarily mean that I have ran into problems because there's been nothing wrong with my plants. I just feel like they do take a time and they do slow down a little bit during the winter time, but I feel like that's also my time to catch up with all of my plant chores and make sure that
Mm,
they're flushed out and make sure that
yep.
the roots aren't digging into the reservoir, like things that I would like to make sure that they're not doing. But I
Mm.
haven't actually experienced growing in an outside environment. So that's something that I definitely want to get into with temperature, especially in my zone, because it gets really hot in the summertime and it can get really cold.
I get asked this question a fair bit actually about the weather and growing outside and things like that. And like you, I don't grow my plants outside at all, so it's a bit difficult to gauge. And cold water in winter, I'm thinking they're thinking about the state of the reservoir. So maybe if you're living like, in a climate where, you have like a deep freeze outside where it's like below zero or something,
Hmm.
and the reservoir freezes, for example, then
Yeah.
obviously it would get affected. But heck, by then your plant probably be dead anyway. But then I'm
Yeah. We
also
want to make
thinking
sure that
of
we're bringing our plants inside
yeah, I'm also thinking
for
about
any.
things like what happens to the actual makeup of the nutrient solution itself. Do you get precipitation of the specific nutrients in the reservoir because of the temperature fluctuations? I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Just, I mean, I will say that in the colder months, I do also switch my light schedule for my plants during the wintertime.
Mm,
I do give them less light, so they do slow down a bit. But I haven't noticed any damage growing inside. I will say that.
yeah.
Outside, we shouldn't leave our plants in freezing temperatures outside. And just like I don't leave my plants outside because we get up to like
It's too
103
hot.
here, and
Mm,
yeah, it's
yeah.
way too hot. I mean,
Yeah.
of course. I mean, I don't even like being outside when it's that hot. So
Unless, of course, your plant is acclimated to living out there, but that's a whole different story. But
yeah, that's. I mean, yeah, that's
anyway,
a whole different story.
yeah. So this one
So
is
yeah,
for you. How do you use a moss pole in pon? Can most of the nutrients come from the base? Or maybe it's for me. I don't know. Do you use moss poles?
I do not. I do not have a
Okay.
moss
All
pole.
right. That's for me then. That's for me.
That's for you.
How do you use a moss pole in pond? The same way you use a moss pole in soil, the same way you use a moss pole in leca. And I think by the fact that you're saying, can most of the nutrients come from the base, to me is saying that you're thinking that the sphagnum moss in the moss pole is going all the way down to the bottom of the pot, which has access to the reservoir, which is what you should not be doing. So when you
Mm.
make a moss pole, right, you've got, let's assume this is a moss pole, right? I can't find a plant with a moss pole in oh, there's one here. Yeah, you'll do. But all right. This is my Monstera albo. Isn't she gorgeous?
Gorgeous.
Living on a moss pole. Look at those roots. Now, when you've got this plant here, all this is filled with sphagnum moss. That sphagnum moss stops there. There's no sphagnum moss inside there. because if you have the sphagnum moss inside this pot that is exposed to the reservoir, you can see there's nutrient solution there that's dripping there. This is what's sitting in the reservoir. That moss is going to suck up all that nutrient solution because that's what it does. Sphagnum moss absorbs moisture and it's going to be very wet in there. Now, you might think that's
Mhm.
good because it's going to spread to the rest of your moss pole. One, it won't, not really. But two, it's going to mean that those roots that are right next to that are exposed to that moisture from that sphagnum moss and they're going to get, you guessed it,
Root
root
rot.
rot. Yeah. So, the way to grow a plant on a moss fall in Pon or Leca is to make sure that you don't have your moss going inside the pot, so that moss in the moss pole is not exposed to that reservoir. You can have a wick going through there, but how that functions or whether it works well is very, very highly debatable. Personally, I don't think it even works as well. You just need to water your
That's
moss
a
pole.
long way for it
It's a
to
long way
stay
up. It's a
hydrated.
long
Yeah,
way up.
long
Exactly.
way up.
So I think you just need to water your moss pole the way you do. And of course, I will say I have lots and lots of content about how to make moss poles and how to grow plants on moss poles in semi-hydro, which is a little bit different from how you do it in soil on my channel. So if you want to know more about that, I'm your gal. Does the size of the pot matter when you're using pond?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, a lot of people use, and we've touched on this before.
Mm-hmm.
Your root system matters. I see a lot of people using a very small root system in a really big pot.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to note that Pon is dense. It's heavier than Leca. So I usually start everything off in these small containers that I will gradually upsize
Mm-hmm.
when the roots are ready for it. And you'll
Mm-hmm.
know that it's ready for it because the roots will be outgrowing out of your pot. So
Mm-hmm.
pot size does matter in Pon. It
Mm-hmm.
definitely does because you can add a lot of extra weight to your roots that you probably don't want for a young
Mm-hmm.
plant. So I definitely would say base it off of your root system.
So would your plant be predisposed to root rot as well, just like it would be in soil because that pond stays moist a lot longer?
Too moist for what the plant can uptake, especially if it's
Yes.
a younger plant. And I find this with younger plants and also with alocasias.
Yep.
I see this all the time. I
Occurs.
see a small alocasia in a 6 inch pot, and I'm like, okay, well, I
That's
mean,
not going
that
to end
plant is
well.
way too small. Yeah, it's too small. It's too small for it.
Okay,
So
which
yes,
is
yeah.
which is good, and I'll throw this in though because that's slightly different from what you'll get from a leca scenario, and
Mm,
I always like to say, especially if you've got a very big plant like a monstera or something, like the ones I've just shown you. If you know that you've got a Thai constellation, for example, which has like 6 million, it gives out so many roots. Monsteras are so prolific in root production, and you've got a
hmm.
tiny plant and it's gonna, in 6 months time you're gonna need to repot it because it'll just be completely root bound. It's okay if you're growing it purely in leca to go a bigger size pot, because that's not going to make any difference because all you've got your reservoir. Your leca is airy. You're not likely to get root rot like you would in soil or like you would in pond. So leca is so much more forgiving in that way. You can grow many sizes up.
Ah, that's really, really good to know. Yeah,
Yes,
I
it's
mean,
very
you can
handy.
see, my aerial roots back here. I mean, they probably need a moss pole, but they're fine growing up the wall.
No, they don't need a moss pole. Area roots. I like moss. I like area roots growing everywhere. And FYI, I actually don't like moss poles. But that's a subject for another time.
Ah, yeah.
Next, what's the best pond particle size? Is there such a thing? Or does it depend?
I will stick to this, right? I only use lechuza.
Yeah.
I have tried bigger, chunkier pond. It works the same.
Mm.
There really is no difference. But the only difference, like if we're talking about plants that have a finer root system, they're probably not going to like the chunkier pond. The only difference that I found between a chunkier pond and the smaller pond is moisture retention and watering frequency.
Mm,
Anything else outside of that, it works exactly the same. So
fabulous.
that's really the only difference. And I will
Cool.
leave it at that. And because that's really the only two differences that I've really seen.
Pon is so tiny. It falls through holes. Is that a problem?
There are specific pots for the medium that you are using. So I use a closed cachet pot, and I feel like that's what works best for lechuza because it is a smaller pond. If you're doing a chunkier pond, like, or even if you were doing pumice or just a chunkier lava rock, then different pots will work, and you might not run
Yeah.
into that problem.
Mm,
If you decide to grow in lechuza, which is a smaller pond, definitely get a closed cachet pot so then we're not running into that problem of the pond falling through your
yeah.
holes.
Yeah.
And you should be using a self-watering pot with, unless if you're growing in the way that you do with it sitting
Yeah,
directly
with
in
the
it,
submerged.
then
I
you
know some
that,
people who've used like coffee filters or, like a grower's mesh or something under the pot so that the pond doesn't fall out, but also so that the roots sort of don't start growing through the little holes.
that might be interesting.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, I like to see them go through the reservoir because
Yeah.
it lets me know that it's ready for
It's
a
time.
bigger
Yeah.
pot.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I
But
like
these
seeing
are
that.
all different things that people try to sort of counteract that.
I mean, it's inevitable. I mean, you want your plant to grow, you know? You can stop it for so much. I think
You
I
do.
told you the other day that I have a pretty big Monstera in a 10-gallon pot that's not a self watering pot. And I'm pretty sure when that plant is ready for a new pot, it's just going to break the pot. The roots are going to end up breaking the pot. And then it'll be like, okay, I'm ready for a new vessel, you
I'm
know?
ready for a
So,
new pot,
uh,
please.
yeah,
Can I have a
exactly.
new room, please?
Exactly. But until now, she's in there and she's good.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, that is all the questions that I have for you, Fidel. Do you have anything that you'd like to add before we close off?
I will just say that if you are interested in growing in passive hydro or semi hydro, whatever you'd like to call it, just make sure that you're starting off with one plant. Make sure that you're assessing your lifestyle. Make sure that it works for you. It has done wonders for me in my collection. And I think we can both be testaments of the thriving plants that we have in passive hydro. I always tell people you will not know if you will fail at anything if you don't try, and it never hurts to fail. But you will have success if you try it with one plant and get that one plant down. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out.
Where can people find you, Fidel?
And I'm on Instagram at the Pon Don. You can find me. I'm there. Follow me. And I'm always sharing little drops of knowledge. And if you guys have any questions or anything, I'm always available as much as I can to answer them. So
Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. We've sat here for such a long time. You've been so
I
patient.
know.
You've been such a gracious guest, and I'm looking forward to talking to you again. And I'll just throw this
Absolutely.
out there to you, Fidel. I would love to do a plant challenge with you one of these fine days. I think it would be the ultimate. Which one is best, Pon or
I think
Leca? Come on.
I think I think so. And honestly, I really just have to hand it out to you that I was so open to doing this with you because I was like, finally, somebody else that is specifically growing in a medium that they love and they've had success with it. So I feel like we're distant family because we're growing in semi and passive hydro. And I was like, finally, I'm like, somebody, like, you're not in the US, but you're across the pond, but we're still like, we love growing in our medium. And I respect you and hats off to you because
Oh,
I love somebody that sticks to that. So it was great, and
you're
thank
making me
you.
blush now.
No, it's just great. It's just great that somebody sticks to their guns and grows in their medium. So I appreciate it. And I thank you for doing this, and I hope everybody gets their questions answered.
Thank you so much, Fidel. I will see you next time, and you guys will see Fidel next time because he will definitely be back, and we will do that plant challenge.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Fine challenge. Bye, y'all.